Welcome to 15-Minute Fundamentals, where we break down crypto projects and learn about the drivers behind the data you see on our charts. Today, I'm joined by Hazard from ROOK, a decentralized payment for order flow protocol.
Hey Hazard, welcome to 15-Minute Fundamentals. It's great to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. Could you start us off with giving just a quick intro to ROOK for those not yet familiar?
Sure. So ROOK, the ROOK DAO, is a collective dedicated to developing the ROOK protocol, which is a DeFi protocol that allows users and builders of applications to essentially own their order flow or their transaction flow, if you want to think about it that way. And what this means is that as you use a blockchain by sending orders or transactions to the blockchain, you can create something called MEV. And many people are familiar with MEV. It's essentially some form of surplus value, some excess value that your transactions sort of have that as a result of how you trade and how that trade is settled. So this MEV typically will accrue to the producers of the blocks on the blockchain as a result of their power over the order in which the transactions go into those blocks, which is how that MEV, that value, can be extracted. And what our protocol does is it actually allows that extraction to happen not with the block producers, but actually on behalf of the users and the applications that create these transactions that create the MEV. So essentially, it's a way for you as a user or as a builder of an application to own this value that comes along with your order flow and use it to do things like monetize an application or earn extra money on your trades or on your other blockchain interactions, or just to prevent harmful MEV like sandwich attacks and front running from harming you as well. So it's a system that allows you to own your order flow and develop this value from the order flow that would have gone to block producers if this system like this, a system like the ROOK protocol wasn't here working for you.
Great overview of both ROOK and MEV. Then another term that we'll be speaking about today is a keeper. I'd love if you could quickly define what a keeper is in the context of ROOK.
Right. So a keeper is a form of automation. So it's basically a bot. Some people call them searchers, right? You sometimes see that used as an MEV searcher. So it's basically a bot that has a lot of algorithms and a lot of off-chain computation that looks at the blockchain and kind of analyzes all of the different state on the blockchain, block by block. So it will look at all of the liquidity pools, it'll look at all the lending protocols, and look at all the different protocols to determine if there's a way that it can produce a profitable transaction during the next block. And it will simulate all of the potential things that it could do to create this profitable transaction. And if it finds one, then it will go ahead and try to execute that transaction. And what ROOK allows is for these keepers or searchers, these bots, which are typically sort of the adversaries of a user or an application, which is trying to send orders to the blockchain. These keepers can see these orders and actually act against them, or try to front run them or do other things that can disrupt those orders. What ROOK allows is actually for these keepers to coordinate with users and applications so that they're kind of cooperatively developing this value and settling these orders in tandem. So you can think of them as very sophisticated settlement agents. So they know all the best places to get liquidity. They know the best way to settle a transaction onto the blockchain. And they have all of these insane, algorithms and tricks and things that will let them settle a transaction as efficiently as possible while capturing additional value, additional MEV. And what the system allows is for them to do that on your behalf so that you're getting best execution when you want to send your orders to the blockchain. And at the same time, you're also getting the vast majority of any MEV that these keepers discover for you.
It would be great to break down your business model so that we understand how cash flows both through the protocol to supply side participants and how you are capturing that value as revenue that accrues to the protocol.
Sure. So you can think of what we do almost as a form of payment for order flow. Think of the user and as somebody who is going to send their transaction not directly to the blockchain, but they're going to offer it to a huge network of keepers of these bots. And they're going to say, who would like to settle my transaction? I will give to the highest bidder the exclusive right, exclusive, so only this bot that wins this auction will be able to settle this transaction. And what happens is there's a just-in-time auction that occurs among these bots for the right to settle this order. Now, like I said, these keepers, they can simulate the blockchain, so they can know how valuable your order is. So say you wanted to sell, I don't know, a ton of Ether on Uniswap or something, and it's going to create some kind of price imbalance on that pool versus the sushi pool. And this keeper knows, well, if I can settle their transaction along with an arbitrage of the sushi pool and the uni pool, well, then I can make some additional profit. So I want to be the one to settle their transaction because that means I'll be the one that can make this arbitrage profit. In doing that, they need to pay for the right to be the one to execute that. And so that payment is going to happen through the ROOK protocol. The ROOK protocol is what facilitates these auctions for the order flow that's coming from users and applications. So payment for order flow is a really scary word because, in traditional finance, typically what happens is you sign an agreement that says, we'll pay you this much money for your order flow, and don't worry about how much we're making from it. Who knows how much it is? It might be 10 times what we're paying you for it, not your problem, right? We don't do that in DeFi, and we can't do that in DeFi because that would centralize the network if we were able to siphon off that much value. So we actually look at the way that we work with payment for order flow as a public good. We want to provide a public good so that you or any application can start to earn the fair value from their order flow as if they were kind of Robin Hood making an agreement with Citadel, making an agreement with the very best settlement agents on the blockchain, these bots. Anybody can use it and start earning money just by doing what they would normally do on the blockchain. And so in that model, what we actually aspire to is to pass as much of this MEV that gets discovered in these orders back to the users and to the applications that create those orders. And so the way that value flows through the system is that essentially each order initiates an auction among a network of bots who are then going to bid for the exclusive right to execute that order. The winning bid is then paid to the protocol, and the protocol divides that bid in various ways. And the vast, vast majority of that bid, 80% or more of it, is going to go to the user who originated the transaction. And we actually aspire to push that even higher so that the user is getting the absolute maximum amount that's possible. And the only thing that's left is what they need to pay to the winning keeper to kind of incentivize them to actually settle the trade. So you can think of it as almost a settlement fee that's paid to the keeper. And then however much is necessary to operate this public good protocol, right? But all of this isn't payment coming out of their pocket. This is all paid for using the additional value in their orders. So to the user, their orders are suddenly free. They don't pay gas. They don't have to worry about slippage. They don't have to worry about liquidity fees. They don't have to worry about MEV. Everything is free, and then they're going to get additional value on top of that as a result of this MEV that their orders develop. And from that surplus is where all of these little costs are taken out. And so that's our aspiration, is to ensure that the vast majority, as much as possible of this value is actually passed back to the user through the protocol. And this is all protocolized and managed by a DAO. It's not sort of an agreement that we sign and say, yeah, sure, we promise we'll do this and this. It's all transparent and it's all completely verifiable on chain. And so it's really interesting. It's a different approach to payment for order flow than you'd ever see in something like traditional finance.
Perfect. Now, on kind of that note of value through the protocol, what would you say are the current drivers or challenges related to your growth?
This is a great question. And we had to contemplate this too. Because if you look around at what the work that's been done on MEV, most of it's been done at what you might call the consensus layer or the settlement layer. It's done with, mining software. And it's a reasonable question to ask, well, why has nobody asks the question like, well, what about users and applications? They are making the MEV, so don't they deserve the MEV that they make? Because today they don't get any of it, right? It all goes to the miners or to the validators, right? Once the merge happens. So why is that? Why has nobody addressed the issue at the application layer to give users and applications this MEV back? And the reason is, at the consensus layer, there's one piece of software, right? There's, Geth or the validator node software. There's just, you fix it in one place and then everybody uses that piece of software and you're good. To fix this at the application layer or at the layer where users are interacting with the blockchain, it's much more heterogeneous. Every application is different. Every protocol is different. Every smart contract is different. Different wallets, different users and things that users do. All of these differences create a very challenging environment to create solutions for. It's hard to have a one-size-fits-all solution, but we know that it's possible, and we know that it's necessary. It's necessary in order to create a competitive piece of technology that everybody's going to be able to use and prosper by using. So we're committed to working in what we kind of call the jungle side of the blockchain, which is all of these applications that are very different from each other, right? And to build primitives that allow these applications over time to begin to integrate with the ROOK protocol so that they can begin to develop these cash flows for themselves, these cash flows that we know belong to them to begin with, right? And are just the result of their normal activity on the blockchain. And really, the barrier to growth there is education, because for the last few years that everybody's been learning about MEV, nobody has been talking about the fact about where does the MEV come from. We hear that $1 billion of MEV has gone to miners this year. Well, where is that coming from? It's not coming out of thin air. It's actually coming out of users' pockets, applications' pockets, out of their liquidity pools, their liquidity providers. This is inefficiency in the blockchain that's leaking out. And this is not something that's commonly understood. And that's something that we have to overcome. We have to overcome this idea that the MEV is just kind of here and around. It's actually coming out of users' pockets and applications' pockets. And once people understand that, and many developers are very aware of this, but not so many users. Once people understand that they kind of have a claim on this value, then they're much more interested in, well, oh, what do you mean? Oh, I can get it back. If I use this protocol, I can actually get that value back. And so we're committed to making it so that they're aware of this fact and that they have a good experience using the protocol so that they can see that, it's really true. They can monetize in a way that's responsible for the network and for their users, and in a way that isn't taking from anybody else's, it's not eating anybody else's lunch. This is value that belonged to them to begin with, and it actually makes our blockchains stronger and our markets more efficient if they're able to capture this value.
Coordinating MEV at the application layer, truly a fascinating subject. And I think you summed it up really well, that education will play an extremely important role in kind of getting the message out to people. I wanted to ask what your user base looks like right now. So who the main users of ROOK are.
So there's a couple of ways to view this, because essentially the ROOK protocol, it creates a marketplace. So you could argue that one user of the protocol are these bots, these keepers. They're using it because it gives them access to order flow. We have many market makers that also enjoy the protocol because our trading protocol that's built on top of the coordination layer that we have allows them to have a single connection to what is presented to them as an order book kind of interface, something that's very familiar to them if they've been making markets on centralized exchanges, right? But this order book is actually connected through these keepers to all of the different liquidity pools in DeFi. And so they enjoy this very much because they can market make on-chain in a way that is still non-custodial and that embraces all of these different liquidity sources that are available on the blockchain. And they don't have to pay gas and they don't have to pay liquidity fees. They just set up their spread and they're earning it. And every time one of their orders fills, if it creates MEV, that MEV goes back into their pocket. They love it. It's a great product. And so there's been a lot of interest from market makers being able to use this to bring more liquidity to the blockchain. We also have a trading app that's been quite popular since we launched it in April. So it's at app.rook.fi. And it allows anybody who wants to trade on the blockchain to trade through this network of keepers, just like you would on 1inch or Matcha, basically. We don't have market orders yet. It's limit orders, but we have some really interesting algorithms that allow these limit orders to execute quite rapidly, especially for the most liquid pairs. And it's a really cool product because every time you trade, you don't pay gas, you don't pay a fee. Actually, the system pays you a fee, right? Because your trade's going to create MEV, and so you're actually going to be paid for each trade that you make that fills, which is really interesting. It's a really cool product. And so we've had a lot of usage of that product, both from market makers on the API side and from users that are using the app. And we've seen some huge trades, $80 million chunks of trading, and it's been really exciting to watch. And we think that usage is only going to grow. But we also have a lot of protocols that have been working with us to start integrating directly at the protocol layer or at the application layer, right, directly into their smart contracts or to their systems, so that they can start to relay some of their transactions through the protocol and start to develop some of these cash flows and MEV protection. And we think that's a really interesting area where we're going to start seeing more of these come online. Every team that we've talked to has been so excited by this because this is the first time they've been able to actually do this. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to having a lot more of those stories and case studies come out over the next few months.
Yeah, great to hear. Now, on to tokens in general, your tokenomics. I'd love to hear what the purpose of the ROOK token is.
So the ROOK token is essentially how we represent MEV in the system. So I said that keepers are going to bid on users' orders for the right to execute those orders. So the thing they're using to bid in that auction is the ROOK token. And so users are being provided with the ROOK token, and the protocol is splitting up the proceeds of this auction from in units of ROOK token and providing them to the various, directing them to the various places that the protocol has said that they should go, including the user, the protocol's treasury. Some of it is burned, and keepers purchase this ROOK on the open market, and then they stake it into a staking contract, and from that staking pool, they can use those funds to bid through these auctions. So it's essentially the unit of account for keepers who are bidding for the right to settle these. So you can think of it as sort of a unit of MEV. It's used like that. It's also used as a governance token to direct the operations and decision making in the ROOK DAO, which stewards the protocol and its development and so on. So we have full DAO governance, and the ROOK token is used as part of the voting procedure to vote on proposals and ratify matters and things like that.
Sure. And you mentioned staking. So is xROOK a staked version of ROOK?
Right. So we have two forms of staking. One is that keepers are going to use the ROOK, and they're going to stake it for the purpose of bidding. And then we also have sort of kind of a public form of staking where members of the ROOK DAO, people who own ROOK, can stake that ROOK into a staking contract. They receive xROOK, and they will receive a pro rata portion of this bid that you can think of as sort of the protocol revenue. This is an adjustable portion via DAO governance and so on, but they essentially will receive a small portion of that in return for staking the token. And staking gives them certain governance rights and so on. And this is really interesting because ROOK is actually a deflationary token. So we don't have any token emissions right now. We don't have any plans to have them either. And so what it basically gives you if you stake ROOK is it gives you a stake in the governance of this DAO and its protocol. And as these protocols grow, because of the fact that the ROOK that passes through the protocol, some of it is burned, you essentially have a non-diluting stake in the growth of this protocol, and which is really good because we think that early participation has been great, and we have seen enough of these kind of mint-driven DeFi incentives to know that that's not really sustainable or able to align interests in the long term. And so we're really proud of the fact that if you receive Rook tokens or you stake Rook tokens, it's not emissions that are being minted out of thin air, and it's not something where you're going to just be diluted out over time or something like that. We really want this to be a community-owned protocol and really owned by its users. And again, that's the interesting thing about receiving Rook when you use the system, because users become owners. And we really think that captures the kind of the public good philosophy that we are trying to promote with this project.
Okay, cool. So xROOK stakers earn a portion of the total protocol revenues that you gather. How about the rest of this?
Yes. So to be explicit, when Rook is bid for these orders and the protocol accepts the winning bid, the protocol is going to divide that bid in several ways. And like I said, 80% of it is going to go to the originator of that order that was bid on, so the user or the application. And then some adjustable percent of it is going to be burned. Some adjustable percent is going to go to stakers. And then there's an adjustable percent that can go to the DAO's collective treasury as well. And so those are the kind of 4 or 5 different destinations that Rook can go to. And again, the vast majority is to the user. And the rest is essentially just sort of tokenomics to make sure that the protocol is operating in the way that we want, and everything's adjustable. So we actually just launched this in April, and we've been kind of iterating on this to kind of find the right balance, because really the emphasis is on the user, but we also need to make sure that the protocol can sustain itself. And so we've been tuning many of these parameters collectively.
You mentioned the protocol treasury, and I wanted to dive into that because if we look at your treasury composition chart, it is very nicely diversified compared to most DeFi protocols who hold the bulk in their own token. But you have it split into quite a few. So I would love to hear your thinking behind this. And do you have a specific treasury management strategy in place?
We do. And we are very proud of our treasury and of the way that it's been managed. I think, even, several months ago when we looked around, it occurred to us that, many projects don't manage their treasuries or really have treasuries to speak of. They have sort of piles of their native token, but it's hard to call those assets. And so it's something that we've put a lot of work into very deliberately, because, this is sort of the long-term fund that's going to ensure that the protocol can be developed to a level where network effects are taking over, and it's able to create this self-sustaining ecosystem, right, that it aspires to. And so, yes, we have a wonderful treasury management group at the DAO, and we've had a lot of great community participation on treasury matters. We have a weekly treasury call that's open to the public that you can join our Discord and check out. And yes, we very deliberately, emphasize sort of risk minimized assets and also management minimized assets, because we sort of recognize that DAOs are not ideal for, agile management of kind of like hair trigger positions and high risk complex instruments and things like that. And so we actually don't really use the treasury to chase yield or as a vehicle for complex investments. It's really a long-term fund that we want to keep aligned with, general ecosystem narratives. Like, we hold a lot of Ether, we hold a lot of stable coins that are diversified in various ways. And, we are probably going to transition. We've had some recent proposals to transition some of that Ether into various forms of staked Ether in a way that's, responsible and ensuring that, there's a good diversification and making sure that some of these other liquid staking projects are receiving some of this volume. So yeah, we really have a great team that's focused on that. And I know it's sort of the pride of the community. It's a wonderful resource that we are pretty diligent about shepherding in a professional way.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think a lot of DAOs should take a look at how you're managing the treasury, because even though in TradFi this would be a no-brainer, but I think in DeFi what you're doing is still pretty novel. So it's good you're taking an initiative there. And I think a lot of people people will follow. You mentioned that Rook is at the moment deflationary, correct me if I'm wrong, but does that mean that you're not utilizing token incentives in any way?
Well, it's hard to say that we don't utilize them because, like I said, if you are a user and you want to use the Rook protocol, or if you're an application, well, you put orders in and tokens come out, right? The difference is that the protocol is not creating those tokens out of thin air. A keeper somewhere has purchased those tokens, staked them, and has then bid them in an auction for your orders. So they're coming to you as sort of a redistribution from kind of, I guess, the open market to you as sort of payment for this. So there is, in a way, a token incentive because your orders, you need to be incentivized. Like, why should I offer my orders to this system rather than to another system or to, just a public mempool? And there's good reasons that you could say, well, this will protect you from MEV and maybe it's gas free and so on. And a lot of times that's all you'll get, and that's good enough. But we really want to make sure that you actually receive all of the value that you're due. And we know that that value is more than just covering your fees and making sure that you don't get, front run. That's kind of small ball. We want to give you the true value of your order, which is going to be in excess of that. So it's not enough to give you free trades. We want to pay you the fair value that's discovered in a credibly neutral way, this auction process, for your orders. And so that's how we do that. So in a way, there are token incentives. However, those token incentives aren't coming from, any kind of inflationary process or any other kind of process. It's just the free market at work, right? We think that a public good that's going to discover order flow in this way is going to be able to pay you more, you being a user or an application, it's going to be able to pay you more than any other bidder for your order flow. And that's good for the network because then the most of that value, most users will choose the service that pushes most of the value back towards the edges, back towards the users, and that keeps the network decentralized. And we like that, and that's what we're aiming to do.
We've covered quite a lot of ground here already for this session, which is great. I've learned a lot personally, gotta admit. Now, I want to wrap this up with, is there anything else on the future roadmap for Rook that people should be aware of that you'd like to share now?
The future for Rook is huge, and the reason I know that is because you just learned a lot about Rook. And I'll bet that most of the listeners here have not used Rook, probably haven't even heard of Rook. And so that's how I know that the future is huge, because we're building something that every single person that uses a blockchain would be happy to use. Something where you just do what you're doing every day and money comes out of it. Money for you that you weren't getting before. And that's the kind of product that you dream of. And it's actually good for the network, right? There's nothing up our sleeve. You dream about those kinds of products. And so the future for Rook is going to consist of this gradual expansion into different areas of DeFi until the hope is everybody is using Rook, whether they think they are or not. It might be something that's not visible to them. It might be something their applications that they like are using under the hood or whatever. But they'll feel the effect of its action. They'll feel the markets becoming more efficient. They'll feel the more money in their pocket. They'll feel like it's easier to use the blockchain than it was before. And for builders, it'll feel easier to build protocols on the blockchain without having to worry about MEV, without having to worry about value being siphoned by stale quotes or by arbitrageurs or any of these kinds of problems. So the future for Rook really consists of, we have the base protocol, which is this really key piece, this coordination piece, this engine that allows us to run this neutral order flow auction. And then we have our wonderful trading application that's been built on top of it, kind of as a first-party application. But what you're going to start to see over the coming months is as more and more of our partnerships start to come online, and as we start to introduce some new products that we're really excited about around and building on top of this protocol, new primitives that people can use and start to stir into their applications, I think you're going to see the application layer begin to recognize that it can become productive without actually changing much about what it happens today. And I think they're going to make that choice. And so we're focused on giving them the easiest decision they've ever made in their life, something that's going to be good for the network, it's going to be publicly accountable and transparent and run as a DAO, and it's going to pass them the absolute maximum amount of value that they could derive from their order flow. And we think that's going to be really compelling. So I'm looking forward to the coming months as more and more people learn about this technology.
Yeah, me too. I mean, this is truly fascinating stuff, and we'll definitely do this again, take a bit of a deeper dive interview into what's going on at Rook once you launch some of these new features and get the word out there about this so that users really understand what you're working on. But thank you so much, Hazard, for taking the time to do this. This was a super fruitful discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.